economic model failed. And now if you see various things happening around the world, so are we going in a direction where, I mean, we can say that, capitalism also as a model for development is on its deathbed?
You've heard Michael Porter, who is supposed to be this guru in management education. He's last couple of years he's been propagating this concept of creating shared value, which essentially means that just abandon the notion of value as traditionally we've talked about, and he would admit that he'd been propagating that notion of value for really long. The last couple of years he's talking about creating shared value which includes everyone, and given the problem that capitalism has faced with the environment, with disparity in income, etc., of course he spent his full career promoting capitalism, so he's not going to abandon capitalism altogether, but the fact that it is going down a blind alley is clear to him. So he's looking for a path where there is some light, and he's very similar, responding to the criticism and showing a new direction. So capitalism as we know it, even the captains who are promoting that are abandoning it. Whether they will give it up, I don't think. Society moves without, there's a path dependence in society. And we just can't go back, clean the slate and start again. And given that, I don't think we'll abandon capitalism, but there will be a course correction definitely, and a significant course correction.
Throughout history, there have been very many more models than what one witnesses in projections of capitalism and socialism. And perhaps we would do better if we try understanding, researching on what really is a functional society, and sort of look away from the immediate prescriptions of political and political-economic prescriptions which one sees, like in capitalism and in socialism. And the various leaders, as he's pointed out, who champion, have themselves come questioning it. And so there is a clutter of development which goes on around us, and remnants of thoughts regarding capitalism and socialism which is around us today. But one has to look beyond that, and one has to think of what really is a functional society, what really is a society which allows for variety of pursuits to prosper and flourish. We have to ask these questions afresh and not look for ready-made answers. They're all dead.
Yeah. Pramati, from one of the branded schools in Bangalore. From a parent's perspective, I see two problems. Problem number one is, as Professor Roja said, we are ourselves products of the Macaulay paradigm. And problem number two is, and I see this with most parents, they look at education as an issue which needs to be outsourced to the school, and that they don't have any responsibility as far as the child is concerned. And today, where I, from my own perspective, want to move from the old paradigm on to the new one, and want to contribute to my child's growth and development, I'm not equipped. And I don't want to outsource the problem just to Purna Pramati, but I want to be part of, the whole development. And I'm kind of, I don't know where to go with this.
Most people's kids go through a standard schooling system, and yet if the parents have even a bit of time on their hands, you can teach them stuff at home on your own very differently. I think we have done a lot of that with our kids, and even though, as I said, they've gone to completely standard schools, I think I think their classmates would justly regard them as eccentric because of the way we brought them up. I think we all have the opportunity and maybe even the duty to do that. Why do you say you don't have time or aren't in a position?
No, I'm not saying I don't have the time.
No, aren't in a position, you don't want to outsource it, but you don't feel equipped. Why do you not feel equipped? I'm puzzled.
So the issue is, when we talk about some of the core values, like being truthful, not being in the rat race, etc. These are things. I was in the rat race, and I've come out of the rat race personally, and so I'm able to give that. But then when I try to envisage, or when I try to look at how it would be, my daughter is just in her 3rd standard. She's just 8.5 now. So when I look at what is going to be in the next 10 years or so, while some of these basic stuff is something that we're trying to inculcate in this, at home, we really don't know how it is going to pan into the future. So as this is an experimental school, so there's more request to the school to say that in addition to teaching the students, you probably also have to teach the parents to make that an integrated team for the development.
Actually, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, please, you want to respond? Yeah.
This is more to supplement what the learned gentleman sitting on the dais are doing. This particular question which you raised, let me just say this. We, between 2001 and 2005, in my own institution, that is in Konkan Railway, we did start a program called Chaitanya program. It's very unique in the world in the sense that the education starts from the day the family, even just before pregnancy, or the first month of the, I used to say from 0 to 5 years. The reason is the medical science says the cognitive processes, learning process of a mind, the entire process gets developed 98% by the time 5 years of age is reached. The unfortunate part is we start regular schooling only after 4th or 5th year. The damage is already done if you are not careful. So the research findings we collected, then I put together a team of professors from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and my own chief medical officer and medical team, then psychologists and psychiatrists of Bombay, very well known people, and an NGO group who also believed that we should do something for the young kids. It was an experiment. There is no laid down process. We didn't know what to do first. So we started an experimental program, called it as Chaitanya. Since unfortunately in this country, if you have power, you can do many things, good things, bad things. So since I'm a role model, so I said that I will give the grants, I will give the toys, gave some things like that, and then organized complete medical tests for all the families. Almost we covered 2,000 families, and close to 1,000 children. From the zero, that means we monitored the children both medically, psychologically, emotionally, and then the training was given to actually parents. All the workshops are for the parents, not for the child. Child, you cannot teach anything. What is the atmosphere you should provide in the house? What kind of words should be used between mother and father? That's what happened. I could do it within Konkan Railway, but as soon as I left, Konkan Railway, of course, all those parents, they are already grown up. There are no influx of people there. It's a static society. Those children are grown up. Actually, I'm waiting for them when they pass out of their high schools, 10th and 11th. On the Facebook and the Twitter, I'm keeping watch. The parents come back to me and give me feedback. But it's a personal kind of development. But why I'm talking today is, if some great people are around the place,
if this concept can be carried forward, it makes a lot of difference in the society. Let me tell you, the child, the brain actually is destroyed by the time they reach a school actually. Many parents deal with their children very badly, they are very harsh, and sometimes when I see even in United States, the harshness with which they speak to their children, simple things they simply start shouting for discipline purpose. You see, at the age of 1 year, 2 years, they talk of discipline and harsh words. I mean, it is really terrible. They are not allowed to think laterally, and they are supposed to produce what is said in the school. They have to exactly do it. Or even in the airport, you cannot sit there, you don't talk, don't look, don't. I mean, I'm terrible. I'm telling you, the way you look at it, it is a tyranny of parents to the children. The love that a child has to get from the parents, they are missing today in the current situation. And I only appeal to the parents that at least first give first love. Then when you bring to school, the child is much better. Thank you.
I think it's a very inspiring example, and I'm sure these things will replicate now that the third era has started. But in IIIT we have started a school, it's just 2 years old, so I don't want to talk much about it. So a school runs for 6 days, 5 days is for the children, 6 days for the parents. Okay, to put it more mildly, 6 days Saturday, there is a 2-hour meeting in which both parents must come. So the parents become a partner in education. It's not training parents, but so that they understand what the school is trying to do and how you can supplement it. It's a very good suggestion, I think. Purna Pramati will look at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Srinivas Varkhedi, Bangalore. If I'm not wrong, this session is dedicated to integrated education and schooling, perspectives from higher education. So all the speakers, they expressed their views about integrity in higher education and research. Actually, in higher education, particularly research, needs depth in a particular discipline. Actually, schooling requires different environment. How to connect these both different scenario? Now, in one sense, we need depth in higher education. So here we are talking about integrity and spreading across the disciplines and how to connect them. So let us focus on these issues.
Would anyone like to?
I think it's quite adequate to start specializing in your education once you enter university and in the later years. I think despite the fact that you need depth in a particular subject, unless you have a broad base of training in various subjects, the quality of thought that you bring to any of the difficult problems you confront later on, let's say if you go into research, will not be the same. So I think there's no contradiction between breadth in your early education and depth when you reach the stage, your late undergraduate years and postgraduate years. I don't think there's a contradiction, frankly, and I think, I guess if you can tell me an example of where this would be a contradiction or pose a problem, I'd be happy to answer it. But from my experience, I find that people who have studied a wide variety of subjects at an early stage are actually better equipped to deal with new and different things in their research.
Yeah, I just want to respond to that. I mean, we did talk about the part and the whole. And so I think at every stage we should know that we are specializing in a part, but we should not lose sight of the whole. We might not be specialists in all. What happens, and I agree with his earlier statement, is we are forced into that part very early in life. Even he talked about the spirit and touching the heart. We don't know why economic growth is important for society at the end of it. I mean, he just mentioned he was in the rat race and he pulled out. So in some sense, we get very early into a part without knowing the big picture. We need to specialize. I mean, whether we specialize in high school or college or post-PhD, I mean, if you notice our qualifications, most of us are doing things which is different from what we did at undergrad, okay? So when you specialize, but at some stage you need to be able to connect that your area of specialization with the whole. People make jokes about regular medicine, that okay, if I'm a lung specialist, I'll come and I will treat your lung, and if you have adjacent to that another organ which also has a problem, because
Which has no problem.
yeah, I don't know about it. It's a joke, I think, but mentally, when we become a specialist, I focus so much on my specialization and learn how to neglect everything else. Finally, we are treating this body, and we need to know how that part I am focusing on is affecting the whole. Unfortunately, in our education, that is missing. And I can say that for myself, going through my undergraduate thing, people who designed our program used to have a whole bunch of humanities courses, okay? But the soft conversation amongst the engineers was, these are things that are forced onto us. These are not essential. These kind of things are just a waste of time. This is the real stuff. Now, I don't know who to blame, but that is how we went through. Now, I don't know whether the institution could have done anything better, because the institution, we run it in IIM Bangalore. I mean, I forget my own thing. We try to do a lot of things, but the general societal movement is so strong that some of these alternate things that you try to do are looked at with sort of disdain to disgust to whatever. A few people benefit from it. So I think it's an uphill task. You know that's why these guys are doing it at school. It's a great thing, because we would like more of holistic people showing up at postgraduate degrees. Because by the time he's out about 5 years damage, we get people with 22 years damage, and doing away damage at that stage is, I think, too late.
Definition of specialization, which is knowing more and more about less and less, to the point where you reach that you know everything about nothing.
Comments?
Can the panelists pose questions to
Yes,
each other?
yes.
No, so I had a specific question to Shankar, which is, one of the issues raised about Ayurveda is about standardization and testing. Now, a fact that we all live with when we use Western medicine is that there have been tests, and those tests have been conducted in ways which, if you confronted them directly, would probably upset you a lot. Animal models and so forth. What is your view? I mean, there are two issues of animal models. One is, ethical questions. The other, of course, is even in a technical sense, is it the right way to go? What is your view on this general question of standardization and testing in Ayurveda?
Well, the Ayurveda is actually got what you can call, it certainly has standards. It has standards for the materials it uses. It has standards for the products that it makes. It has standards for protocols rather for diagnosis. It has protocols for treatment. Let me give you an example. I think it was I'm giving you a small example. This is work done in the National Chemical Laboratory in Pune. I think they've also done work in IIT Kharagpur. And this pertains to one particular product which is relating to preparing what we call bhasmas. So today we say that, there is newspaper reports within India, in America, which say that these Ayurvedic bhasmas are, very dangerous, and that they can cause heavy metal toxicity. And therefore, we should be very careful when we look at anything to do with Ayurveda. You generalize from there and say, be very careful, beware of Ayurveda. Now, in IIT Kharagpur, Dr. M.S. Valyathan, started, it's still going on, started a major initiative. He called that Science Initiative for Ayurveda. And one of the components of that initiative was to look at bhasmas. Now what they did is they prepared bhasmas given the method of preparation as given in the Ayurvedic texts of pharmacy, Ayurvedic pharmacy. They prepared those bhasmas exactly in the methods that were given using the types of furnaces which are sort of relative to modern furnaces. You might call them, primitive furnaces. They are bhattis, they use cow dung cakes, but they followed that exact procedure, they followed the measures that were given and the process, and they found that the end product that they produced for some particular bhasma made of certain materials, I'm not saying this is true for all bhasma, but this was a particular bhasma, they found that the end product was of a nano size, and those microstructures that were formed were like that. And biologically, there was no question of heavy metal toxicity for a material which is of that size because it is smaller than the intracellular. There will be no problem of filtration so far as products of that size are concerned in terms of heavy metal toxicity. And biologically also they were found to be. Whereas the same bhasma, when it was taken from companies which were making that particular product, they found, they did not find those characteristics that were found in this made as per the Shastra. Now the Shastra, in other words, has described the process in great detail, and is, when it is followed, it is found by objective means to be safe and efficacious. The problem is that the standards that are given in the Shastra are so-called subjective standards. Subjective in the sense that I would have to rely on the integrity of a physician to know that those standards have been followed. I don't have objective means to find out whether the bhasma that I am in this case buying has conformed to those standards or no. Really going into this subject, there is this whole question of standards. We seem to think that standards are best set by, the essence of standards is that really you want impersonal method to find out whether something has been done. In science we use instruments which measure and evaluate whether a certain thing has been done, and that instrument takes the place of the impersonal feature. In the Shastras, the standards were set by minds that were impersonal, and so it's not whimsical. So there is a subjective way of being objective by becoming not subjective. Normally when we say something is subjective, it means it is subject to change from person to person. It is not impersonal. But a mind that is free of prejudice, and when we talk of an impersonal mind, we say a mind free of kam, krodh, madh, lobh, matsar, ahankara. That is an impersonal mind. So I believe that, there are definitely standards. In fact, the problem that we are facing in pharmacy is that the standards now being set in Ayurvedic pharmacy are arbitrary, in the sense we are using tools of chemistry or physics to develop standards. Now, which is the best, let's say, Nelikai, Amla? Today you will just take a Nelikai from, botanically correct Nelikai, and you will do some chemical fingerprinting. But we say best, or let's take a simpler example, turmeric, Curcuma longa. The Sanskrit names for turmeric, amongst the important Sanskrit names for turmeric, you have a name called Rajni, Nisha. These are the Sanskrit names for turmeric. And these imply Rajni, Nisha says night. So turmeric is actually supposed to be harvested. This is part of the standards of turmeric. For therapeutic purposes, if you are using turmeric, you must harvest it in the night. That's why those names have been given, Nisha and Rajni. Now, the scientists of today, including the Ayurvedic people, ignore that nomenclature, ignore that advice, and they say, consult a botanist, and he says Curcuma longa is very easy to identify, so you collect it at any time, and you set your standard by collecting it at any time, and then setting microscopic or chemical or DNA markers or whatever level you want to do, and say this is how we authenticate. But an Ayurvedist would simply reject that turmeric based on its point of time of collection, because he would. And if you look at the chemistry of a daytime collection versus a nighttime collection, if you look at the biological activity of a daytime collection versus a nighttime collection, you'd see the difference. So standards are there and they have been given. But to verify those standards, today we may need modern tools, provided that those modern tools respect the traditional standards that were set. And those standards, they were set by impersonal minds, but they were set in a manner in which they can only be followed if you've got integrity. Now, if today we don't know, because things come from all over the place, you would have to use modern tools. But if you do modern tools without going into the subjectively set standards of the Shastra, your standards will be arbitrary. And this is what is actually happening in the whole business of standardization. We are setting arbitrary standards, just using the tools without looking into the guidelines given in the Shastra. But what I'm asserting is that standards were there, but they were not set where they could be evaluated in an objective fashion. They would rely completely on the integrity of a person. And now maybe from the point of view of the theory of knowledge, maybe Navjyoti might like to add some insights into this whole business of standardization.
The terms like objective, subjective, etc., there is a discourse tradition by which they have got certain meaning, like something which is impersonal, that is objective, like an object which is independent of knower. There is another sense of objective. When in a court of law somebody says, I object. When you say I object is that which is obstructive. Whole lot of so-called doshas are objective because they obstruct. They play a causal role. So if one looks at rigorously, obstructive sort of causality in language, in discourse, in sort of science, in everywhere, that there are sort of these doshas or even variety of gunas, these are qualitative entities which Ayurveda has. They are objective in the sense of when we say I object, in that sense, that they over-determine what cannot come or what can come after them. They have a causal behavior. There are a lot of qualitative things which have causal behavior. We have to pass on to the canons of 1920s and 30s in our thought. And so that's it.
If I can also add to this, I would view it as it's a process standard versus a product standard. If you follow this process, it will produce something that will be useful to you, that will cure something. And product standard says, no matter which process you went through, what was the end product, what nanostructures, what was produced. So rather than subjective objective, I view this as a process standard. And for any deep, very complex systems we know today, it is the process standards which come much before. Much before you have detailed understanding of the product. So it is a perfectly objective, but it's a process standard. That's how I would look at it.
One more thing. The quantitative method, number, being deployed to punctuate some aspect of reality, has its own limitation. Much of qualitative objectivity is not capturable through numeric structures, and it is capturable through certain more mathematical structures, different non-numeric kind of things. But so even when we have to develop a difficult problem like how does one standardize protocols and such things, or how does one test protocols or clinical situation, which has no clear answers, where qualitative things will enter. And some reasoning, causal reasoning with qualities is required. And it's a challenge for future.
Yeah, I think as we enter personalized medicine, where depending on your constitution, there will be a different treatment. And Ayurveda has been doing that. I'm no expert in Ayurveda, but this is what little things I've understood. I think we have now beyond time. So we had a productive discussion on what education means. Last question, all right.
Should religion or true religion should play a part in integrated education, as you have given different dimensions to what integrating education means. So my question is, should religion play a part, or do religion?
I will take that question. Okay. I think we have to be clear what we mean by the word religion. So religion as sampradaya, as a common thought, binds people together. I personally feel that the education, the core of education, is about the human, universal human values. And no matter which religion children or the students may be practicing, they should be able to relate those values to their religion. And it will be a good situation where it allows me as a student to see what role my religion is playing with respect to the universal human values. And if the education is structured that way, religion can be a big strength rather than a divisive force. Because we are afraid of religion as a divisive force, but we are all not realizing the positive power of religion also. So this would be a way to connect and harness the positive power in education itself.
Thank you.
So we have had a discussion which covered and touched on very large spectra. So I thought there is no need to sort of give a 1-line or a 3-line summary. You can carry home the summary yourself. But one sentiment which came out was that there is a need for new kind of education, and new experiments in education are most welcome, and experiments which can bridge different knowledge systems, both modern and traditional, would be very good. And in my own thoughts, I think the time is ripe for it, because we are facing a crisis in education. The crisis of the world is a crisis of